Welcome to biology. This is Mr. Troll. Today we're going to be taking a look at Unit 5, Lesson 2, and the topic for today is RNA. Under there, you see that this is the other nucleic acid. So a lot of times when we're talking about nucleic acids, we automatically defer to DNA. But today we're going to introduce RNA, which is another type of nucleic acid, and it's really important. You guys heard about this when we did our Unit 2 stuff on nucleic acids, and we learned a little bit about RNA at that time, but we're going to go into some more detail on RNA today so that you start getting comfortable with not only its structure, but also some of the functional things that RNA does for the cell. Structure of RNA. So RNA, that is an acronym that stands for ribonucleic acid. So once more, that NA, that nucleic acid, is what that stands for. So when you see that NA, think of nucleic acid. Now, just remember that word acid, when we see that, we have to be sure about which acids we're talking about. So going back to organic molecules, we learned that we have amino acids, which are the monomers of proteins, and fatty acids, which are the monomers of lipids. So with nucleic acids, that is another acid category that's an organic molecule branch in and of itself. So just a reminder about that. Another reminder, RNA is made of subunits called nucleotides. And you should remember this from organic molecules, but it's been a while, so this is a good review for you. So each nucleotide is made up of 3 components. And those components are a phosphate group that I just drew here with a P with a circle around it, a sugar, and a nitrogenous base. So whether you see a description as it is here on the left, or whether you see a drawing like the one I just drew on the right, both of those are different representations of the same structure, and that structure is a nucleic acid monomer known as a nucleotide. Another thing that we have to keep in mind is that RNA has 4 different nitrogen bases. So we have a possibility of having 4 different RNA nucleotides. And so the bases can either be adenine, that we represent with an A, or guanine, which we represent with a G, cytosine, that we represent with a C, or uracil, that we represent with a U. And so these bases are similar to the bases found in DNA. Some of them are the exact same. So adenine represented with an A, guanine with a G, and cytosine with a C are the exact same nitrogenous bases that exist on DNA nucleotides as well. The difference is the U, that uracil. That is a base found in RNA only. DNA does not have uracil. Instead, DNA has thymine, represented with a T. So that's one important distinction to make between RNA and DNA, is the difference of that one nitrogenous base. So again, RNA has U, which is uracil. DNA has T, which is thymine. So differences. Besides the bases, there is a difference in the type of sugar that comprises the nucleotides for RNA. So DNA, that sugar is deoxyribose. RNA, that sugar is ribose. So that's one difference, is that the sugars are 2 different sugars. And there's not a whole lot of difference between them. The difference is really subtle, and it's represented in green right here. So in RNA nucleotides, or what they call ribonucleotides, there's an OH group right here. In DNA nucleotides, or what they call deoxyribonucleotides, there's only a hydrogen. So that's a very small, subtle difference, but they are different sugars, and those sugars are what make up the one of the three components of the nucleotides. Another difference, looking at number 2 right here, another difference that exists between these molecules is the number of strands. DNA, and we're probably pretty familiar with this, is double-stranded, so there's 2 of them. That's why we often refer to DNA as a double helix. RNA, there's only 1, and so it is what we call single-stranded. Right here gives a visual representation of that. So on the left-hand side, you can see that RNA is a single strand. And if we look really closely, we can pick out the nucleotides where they have a phosphate group, a sugar, and a nitrogenous base. Same thing with DNA. We can pick out each individual nucleotide where we have a phosphate, a sugar, and a nitrogenous base. So these are what we call polynucleotides. Here, we can see that the DNA has 2 strands, where the RNA only has 1 strand. The other difference that we can point out here is that nitrogenous base. So again, RNA has U, DNA has T, but then the other bases are the same between these 2 different types of nucleic acids. So both of them have A, both of them have G's, both of them have C's, and so the A's, G's, and C's are universal between DNA and RNA nucleotides. As we said before, the bases are different. DNA has adenine, guanine, cytosine, and so does RNA that we represent with A, G, and C, respectively. But DNA has that thymine represented with a T, and RNA has uracil represented with a U. The other difference is with DNA, there's only one type of DNA. With RNA, there are different types of RNA, and we're going to go into detail with those types and go over briefly what their role and function is within the cell. So with the types of RNA, you have mRNA, and that M stands for messenger RNA. And then you have tRNA, and that stands for transfer RNA. With messenger RNA, it goes into the nucleus and it transcribes the DNA message. And we're going to learn exactly what that looks like. And you're going to be taught how to interpret that, how to figure out what that message is going to say based on the order of the DNA nucleotides. And then secondly, there we have that tRNA, which we said stands for transfer RNA. And what that RNA does is it translates the message from mRNA and builds the appropriate protein or polypeptide, because that message contains the order and number of amino acids that need to go into building that polypeptide. If you remember back to our cells unit where we looked at cell structures and organelles, the ribosome's function was to build proteins. And so that's where where this occurs is where polypeptide synthesis occurs, is at the ribosome. So essentially what we're going to be looking at is how the nucleus, which contains the DNA, and the ribosomes work together in order to produce protein.